That was a different kind of telling of the woman at the well, but I think pretty close on what that would have felt like to be ostracized and looked down upon and judged and whispered about, and then to have someone show grace and give value, and it happens to be the Son of God. So pretty amazing depiction. That's what we're talking about tonight. We've been talking about family on mission and what it looks like, what it means for us to be a family on mission together. So not just individuals kind of trying to do our thing out there. It's amazing. It's not even possible to be a good person, much less a godly Christian, much less on mission without each other. It's just one of those lies that we've come to believe again and again and again. I meet people all the time who believe they can be a great Christian without being involved in a body. In fact, something like half of the Christians in the U.S. believe that. And that's crazy, because I can't go very many days at all without people around me. So I'm assuming most of us are alike in that. And so as we go out on mission, we're trying to move as a herd, okay? Not as one little individual sniper person. This is the way I was taught. It was taught like the church is like home base, And so you come back, you are safe there, you get what you need, and then you zip back out on mission and come back. But actually I've come to believe more that we come back and our home base and we all go out. We do have our individual places of mission, but when we do them together, it's powerful. And so tonight what we're talking about, I was going to talk about predictable patterns, which is the next thing we're talking about as a family on mission. And I felt like God just kind of stopped me. It was like, I want you to just think for a second about people like this woman who have never been a part of a family and can only imagine that if they wanted to be, they would be rejected, because they've pretty much been rejected forever. And so tonight I want to talk about who belongs in this family. People who look like us, people who talk like us, people who act like us. And the best way to look at the picture of that, there's a picture here just of hands. There's a lot of different ways that I'd like to see this depicted. But I like this one because I feel like there are a lot of shades. There are even some probably kind of lifestyle sort of things just there represented with people's hands. That's, I think, what the family of God looks like and is supposed to look like. And what's more, Jesus taught us how to do this. So we tend to really love the words of Jesus. When I think about the church and the way I was trained in ministry and all this stuff is all about the words of Jesus. His teachings, make sure everybody understands them. If people understand enough information about the Bible and how people are supposed to do things, then naturally it will just translate into them actually doing it, which is stupid, right? Because just because I know in my head something should be happening doesn't mean I'm actually doing any of it. Go ahead and stick up that triangle, Lennon. So we're really kind of consumed with his words. Every once in a while we get down to his works, which are the kind of things that he's done. And if we believe that a disciple is someone who does the things Jesus did for the reasons he did them, I'm not sure everybody believes that, but that is what I would say, then we need to be worried about his works. And you'll see over here on this dry erase board, Matt was leading us in prayer at 5, which you are all welcome to join for any time you want. At 5 o'clock, we pray here for about a half hour, and someone different leads each week. And looked at the Moravian text reading for today, which showed a beautiful picture of family on mission. It just happened to be today. Happened to be, right? And God's just really cool. But one of the things that I kind of put a square around there that we're still kind of missing is that wonders and miraculous signs. I just put not yet, we haven't quite done that one yet, and that has to do with his works. Until we are doing everything that Jesus did, I'm not quite okay saying we have gone as far as we can go, okay? So it doesn't mean that we have to be doing it today, but that's definitely in my sight. If I'm not seeing the things that Jesus saw, I'm asking, am I really a disciple fully? Because wherever he went and whatever he did, I should be doing those things and going those places too. And sometimes he was in a boat teaching, and sometimes he was walking on water. Know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying we should all go out to Lake Dillon, although it maybe hasn't thawed yet, so maybe this would be a good time to try. But we need to be concerned with his works. But the thing that we're consistently leaning into is an area that I believe most Christians haven't even thought is relevant, and that's the ways of Jesus. That Jesus actually did things in a certain way that makes sense for us to do too. I think a lot of us have just believed, and my whole world, it seems like, outside of this is ministry people and pastors and blah, blah, blah. And we've just kind of believed like, oh, we've just got to innovate on all of that. Well, guess what? We get to imitate first. And there's some stuff that we can imitate even in this culture today. We really need to pay attention to the way Jesus built this oikos, this family on mission, the family of families on mission that is the church. That's really the way we're trying to get ourselves to think about what the church is. Not a business, not a 501c3, not this building, not anything else other than the people of God and a family of families on mission. That's the church, which is people. Now, when Jesus came, people said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." This is why when we talk about missional purpose in a few weeks, the mission is always a who. It's never a what. For Jesus, the mission was a who. Us, right? It wasn't like, I'm going to do this great thing. He was like, I'm going to save some people. I'm going to save all those lost people who want to be found. Not everybody wants to. Know what I'm saying? But the ones who do, I'm going to make sure this is accessible to them and that they can actually be found when they're ready. So, there are some examples of the way Jesus went way outside of himself. The 12 men who surrounded him as his disciples were men, first of all, and Jews, second of all. And even though they all had very, very different backgrounds in various ways, that was enough to kind of maybe show them to be like Jesus in some ways. He also answered questions for people like Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee, other teachers of the law. He spent a lot of time around them just because they happened to be in the same places that he was. He sometimes went into synagogues and preached, but most of the time he was just with people. And so most of the time, when he's not with his actual disciples who have decided to follow him and be near him and learn from him, he's with a lot of other types of people. Even some of his disciples were other types of people, which we'll talk about in a second. Jesus went out of his way to go for those people, to honor those people, and give value and worth to those people who were not looked highly upon in his culture. And I want to just show you a few of them. The first group of people that come to mind when I think of Jesus reaching way outside of what was okay is children. Now, children is hard for us to understand because they're almost idolized in our culture now, right? I mean, people move their entire lives around their kids. I hear this all the time, like, oh, my kids, I got to do this for my kids, I got to do that for my kids, so I can't actually do any of the mission of God stuff. It's all about my kids. Kids are kind of like elevated to this level of idolatry, honestly, in our culture. But it hasn't always been like that. There's a reason that that's happened. It's a shift of the pendulum from the people who used to say children should be seen and not heard, right? Children have actually no value in our society because they can't work, they can't make money, they can't go out in the fields very young. And that actually was closer to the culture in Jesus' day. So we have to think outside of what it looks like for us now, because now we'd be like, okay, children, we have children's ministry, we do everything, kind of like them and around them, and my goodness, it's ridiculous. We talk about family on mission is different than family as mission. Family as mission says, my entire life and my entire mission is these children. Sorry, but if Jesus could be on mission, he didn't have kids or a spouse. We should learn a little bit from that. Not everything that we do should be about these tiny creatures. And I say that as a mom of 3 little kids. And Mother's Day is coming up next week, and we will rejoice. But ultimately, the point is, children in that day were kind of like constantly quieted, constantly shoved aside. They had no value whatsoever. And we see in Matthew 19. It says, one day some parents brought their children to Jesus so he could lay his hands on them and pray for them. Way to go, parents. I'm just saying. These handful of parents who were willing to do that for their kids. But the disciples scolded the parents for bothering him. Now look at this, Matthew 19. Oh, put that on up there, Lennon. Matthew 19 is getting close to the end. You know what I'm saying? Like we're like over halfway through Matthew. This is not in the very beginning. Somehow the disciples have still not picked up that Jesus loves people that other people don't. They're like, hey, go away, scat. What are you doing here? Get away from Jesus. He's got really important things to do with really important people, and that is not you. But Jesus said, let the children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are like these children. And he placed his hands on their heads and blessed them before he left. He went out of his way to say, hey. Just because these people are not important to you doesn't mean they're not important to my Father. They're very, very important. In fact, guess what, disciples? The closer you can get to them and the kind of faith they have, the closer you'll be to the kingdom of God. Another group that Jesus went way out of his way to validate and honor is women. Now in that spoken word, we see the woman at the well. We see her downcast. Why? She was involved in a lifestyle that wasn't godly, right? Jesus talks to her and he says, hey, go call your husband. And she says, yeah, I don't really have one. He's like, yeah, duh, I'm a prophet, Son of God right here. I know, you've had 5. The guy you're living with right now is not your husband. Now we have to keep in mind that culture was not then what it is today. So when we look at women in the Bible who are prostitutes, I can guarantee you they didn't dream of that as a little girl, that one day they would grow up to be involved sexually with multiple people throughout entire days, okay? These are not people who probably had much of a choice in that culture. These were people who had no other choice and were desperate. And even the woman at the well, there's one rendition of it, I think it's in the Gospel of John, kind of like video rendition, where she's kind of like laughing and kind of scornfully talking to Jesus about the Samaritans and, where they go and all this stuff. And it's almost like you would have to put up some sort of veneer at some point, right? Because you're so used to people looking down on you, looking at you sideways, even when maybe this choice wasn't really even your choice. But at some point, you're in a place where you are someone that not other people want to be around. And so she has to go at the hottest time of the day and get water because no other woman will be around her. And no other man will be around her because of that. And Jesus not only looks her in the eye, he asks her for something, which, as she says in this video, would be unclean coming from her hands. So understand, he's not just saying, hey, woman, go get me some water. He's saying, hey, will you serve me? I'm a rabbi. This is what people do. And by the way, it's exactly what I need, even coming from you. That was a massive level of invitation. But look at the other women he comes in contact with. In John 4:27, I love this part. It says, just then his disciples came back after he had this conversation with her. They were shocked to find him talking to a woman. Now that's funny, right there. I just stop right there and think, wow, that's what they were shocked about. Not that she was a Samaritan or that she had a sketchy past, although they probably assumed that at the time of day she was at the well, because he was talking to a woman. Think about the level of stigma it carried, just being a woman, just being someone who is female, something that obviously you can't really determine. None of them had the nerve to ask, what do you want with her, why you're talking to her? Finally a good decision. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes the disciples do dumb things. This was a smart one. They just kind of watched and learned and watched this evangelist go and preach the gospel to her hometown and all these people just by saying, I just met this guy and he kind of read my mail. And you should probably meet him too. An entire city of Samaritans came out to hear Jesus, and many, many, many of them were saved because of this woman. Because she said, hey, he just gave me value. I wouldn't even be seen at a well with other women before I met him. But now that I've met him, and I've heard what he has to offer, I'll go out and talk to anybody. Isn't that crazy? That's a big difference in the level of confidence after meeting Jesus. The woman caught in the act of adultery, sometimes I wonder, where was her oikos? Now, oikos exists for the provision and protection. Maybe she didn't have one. Maybe her extended family was gone. Maybe they had abandoned her. She was caught in the act of adultery. That's intense. Obviously with someone else who they did not happen to drag before to be stoned as well. But whatever. She was a woman, so she deserves stoning. So they're all standing around, and Jesus kind of offers her this invitation into a different kind of family. It's amazing. Mary Magdalene. I did a little research on Mary Magdalene. I'm just telling you. We always call her a prostitute. Why do we call her a prostitute? Why do we assume she's the woman who breaks the alabaster jar? And there's no biblical evidence that she is a prostitute or that she has poured herself out before people. No, the only thing the Bible tells us about Mary Magdalene is that she had 7 demons cast out of her. That's in Luke 8:2. That she was at the cross when everybody else had abandoned Jesus, and that she was one of the first people he presented himself to after the resurrection. In fact, Mary Magdalene is called the apostle to the apostles because of the way she went back and preached. And guess what? They didn't believe her. Think about it. This is the stigma that women carried even after Jesus' resurrection. Was like, you're not making much sense. I'm like, how is she not making sense? I just saw Jesus. He's alive. And they're like, let's go see for ourselves, because here's the silly woman who probably got it wrong. Think about it. It's just amazing. And Jesus chose her and the other Mary and the people who were there at the tomb. He chose them knowing when he did that, what a big deal that would be. In fact, it's such a big deal that over centuries of church history, they've kind of turned Mary Magdalene into a whore. It's unbelievable. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. But just to the point of I'm not really sure she could have been this amazing side by side with Jesus. Not like his consort or anything. Jesus Christ Superstar is not real. Okay, it's just a musical. But one of his people. Unbelievable. Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. We're just about to look at Luke 10 and look at the story of the Samaritan, the amazing Samaritan, I like to call him. But really, right after this, Luke tells us this story. Interestingly, right after he talks about someone else who's ostracized and looked down upon because of who he is, he just tells this little snippet of something about Mary. Now, this Mary was the sister of Lazarus and Martha. And in Luke 10, right after this passage that we're going to read in a second, it says, as Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he taught, but Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Talk about a woman's place is in the kitchen. That was Jesus' day. What is she doing right there? I mean, Martha was disturbed partially probably because she wasn't holding up her end of the bargain of what she was supposed to be doing. But I wonder if it ever seemed to Martha like, that's not fair. Women aren't supposed to do that. I've said this many, many times from this point, but there had never been a woman called a disciple ever in the history of rabbis and disciples ever before Jesus came. And he looks at her and he says, hey, she'll get to that. She's probably going to have to do something in the kitchen. But for now, she has the posture of a disciple. And I'm not going to mess that up. I mean, think about how unbelievably revolutionary that was. To us, we're like, women's rights and like feminism's been around forever, but we cannot even imagine how revolutionary it was what Jesus did with some of these statements. Then we look at other people that he reached out to, tax collectors. I mean, with Matthew, he even made one of them his disciple. One of the 12 tribes that were going to sit on thrones at the end of time, one of those is going to be occupied by a tax collector. And remember, a tax collector was a Jew who went and collected taxes from his fellow people, skimmed off the top. They became very, very rich. They were traitors to their people because they held them under oppression. And they were like, hey, give me another $25. Caesar needs that. And then they'd go buy something for themselves. They were hated. This is why every time sinners and tax collectors go together a lot in the Gospels, right? Tax collectors, huge, huge deal. And Matthew, Zacchaeus, he goes and eats at Zacchaeus' home. In this day, in this culture, to eat with someone was to extend covenant, was to, in fact, offer an invitation into their family. And Jesus is doing this with people like tax collectors. Can you imagine what the Jews were thinking? They told him sometimes what they were thinking. It wasn't good, Like, what is wrong with you? This is not what a rabbi does. This is not what a holy man does. If you were a prophet, you know who that woman is. Well, he did. He just didn't care. He wanted to offer an invitation to the family to everybody who was even halfway interested, who might want to come. And I love the way he says, even to the religious people, hey, all those people out there are entering the kingdom of God before you, because at least they know they're sick. I came as a physician to heal those who know they're sick, not those who think they're okay. And that's the thing with people who are on the outside, who are kind of stigmatized. They usually know they're not okay. Lepers and unclean people, I could go on and on about this, I won't. People who actually showed the signs of what they considered a sinful lifestyle. They believed that leprosy, which in that day was beyond what we see now as leprosy. Now it's like a skin disease that can, eat away your flesh. But in that day, the way this was used most of the time in the New Testament was almost any kind of disease that you could see from looking at someone. Very, very general. And they put people in colonies together. They moved people outside of the camp. They were considered unclean, even to the point where when they came around, they'd have to shout sometimes, unclean, unclean, so nobody would touch them. Because if anybody touched them, then they were unclean. And it was like people were terrified. Like, we probably can't even understand the stigma back then of something like this, because it's just so bizarre to our minds. I have heard some people compare it to people who have HIV and AIDS. That there is a sense of, don't come close, because something about you, which obviously came through some very, very poor lifestyle choice, which we assume, is going to get too close to me, and in some way or another, your yuck is going to get on me, and so just stay over there. Just go over where everybody goes like you and stay out of my sight, because you're unclean. I mean, Jesus touched lepers. Think about it for a second. by the law made himself unclean and did not care. Could have, if he weren't awesome, actually gotten sick himself. And the gospel writers take pains not just to say he healed them, but to say he touched them. Can you imagine how long it had been since anyone had touched them? Especially someone else who wasn't already unclean. Unbelievable. Jesus just absolutely blew to smithereens every social stigma of his day. And he said, you can be part of this family too. And that's what we're talking about. Who belongs? Let's look at the story of the Good Samaritan. I don't even like to call it that. I don't know if you've noticed. The Good Samaritan, it sounds like that one good black guy. You know what I'm saying? It sounds very denigrating to me. The good one. Like there's one good one. I just wonder how this even got. That's not what Jesus said. He didn't say the one good Samaritan. He said there was a Samaritan who came by and he told the story. I don't even like to call it that. It's so bizarre when I think of it in the context of something else. The good woman, there's a bunch of, anyway. It's just unbelievable sometimes how prejudices seep in everywhere that we go. The teacher asked, this is a teacher of the law, so a lawyer, basically, and also one who studied the religious law, the Old Testament law, asked Jesus who his neighbor was. So he comes to Jesus and he says, what can I get away with, basically? He says, how do I find eternal life? Jesus says, well, you know the commandments. He says, sure I do. Love God and love your neighbor. Aha, but who's my neighbor? So we read this story, we're just going to read it from the Message. And just keep in mind, the Jews had struggled with this concept of who their neighbor was for multiple generations. This is why we see all the way through the Old Testament that God has to literally give them laws and rules about how to take care of everybody who wasn't them. He says, when there are strangers in your midst, take care of them. When there are aliens from other people groups, take care of them. It's like they could not be trusted to care for anybody who was anything not like them, to the point that there were rules and laws in place. There were certain seasons when they had to give the extra. There were certain ways that they were supposed to thresh their fields and leave behind some for people who didn't have any because they weren't generous enough to do this stuff on their own. So they had been struggling with this idea. They didn't even really care for their people very well. Because most of the people we see Jesus interacting with are actually Jews. And many of them have been pushed to the edge of society. But now we're going outside of that. And this is what they use. This was the justification they used. This Psalm 139, 21 through 22. Oh Lord, shouldn't I hate those who hate you? Shouldn't I despise those who oppose you? Yes, I hate them with total hatred, for your enemies are my enemies. And they literally would quote this and say, see, we're doing the right thing by hating people who aren't like us. Because God chose us as his people, and so if we don't hate people who hate God, because obviously anybody who hasn't chosen to be Jewish hates God, then we're actually doing God a favor. I'm positive that some of the religious leaders, if not all of them, who crucified Jesus, thought they were doing God a favor. Because they were looking at things like this, and this had become so ingrained in who they were and who they cared about and what they did with their lives, that when someone, even in their own people group, needed help, they were like, unclean, God's given us permission to not touch you. Unclean, God's given us permission to not care about what we have to say. Are you following the law? No? Okay, then get out of my face. You don't get to tell me anything. Not exactly the way Jesus went about anything. So when we look at this story in Luke 10, gosh, I love the way Luke tells a story. I was just going to read it in the Message because I like the way he says these things too. So just then a religious scholar stood up with the question to test Jesus. That was his first mistake. Okay, this guy thinks he's smarter than Jesus. Teacher, what do I do? What do I need to do to get eternal life? He answered, what's written in God's law? How do you interpret it? He said that you love the Lord your God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence. And that you love your neighbor as well as you do yourself. Good answer, said Jesus. Do it and you'll live. See ya. I know what you're up to. I don't have time for this. It's like people want to argue with me about women in leadership. You know what? Here are a couple books. Ain't nobody got time for that. I got stuff to do. So, Jesus knew, this is not a sincere conversation here. This is not someone sincerely questioning. He just wants to argue and test him, and it's never going to work out that well with Jesus when you try to test him. But looking for a loophole, he asked, and just how would you define neighbor? Jesus answered by telling a story. He is so cool. This is Seriously, the coolest. He answered by telling a story. There was once a man, I wonder what this guy was thinking, like, I just came around to talk about religious law. This good dude's telling me a story now. There was once a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road. But when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite, religious man, showed up. He also avoided the injured man. Now, at this point, everybody listening is probably like, yeah, of course they did. He's unclean. The guy's bleeding. You're not going to touch him. Or if he's dead, that's even worse. Now you're super going to be unclean. The rabbi and the Levite have stuff to do. So they're probably thinking, yeah, I'd probably cross the other side too. What are we talking about? A Samaritan traveling the road came on him. When he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds. Then he lifted him onto his donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take good care of him. If it costs any more, put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back." What do you think? Which of the 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by robbers? The one who treated him kindly, the religion scholar responded. Jesus said, "Go and do the same." So the guy asks, who's my neighbor in this way? Who do I actually have to be caring toward? Who do I actually have to love? Who do I actually have to help if they're in trouble? So the logical way of Jesus to have told this story was that it was a Samaritan who was bleeding on the side of the road, and he would have made this man the strong, powerful one who could come along and help him, and he would have made his point. But this is what Jesus does. He doesn't just make the point and answer the question. He goes about 50 yards beyond and says, actually, it's not the Samaritan who needed help. It's the Samaritan who was empowered enough to give help, who had the resources and the kindness. It's a Jewish man. I don't think it says it here in this translation, but in every other translation, the word is there's a Jewish man who went down, and it's the Samaritan who helps. The Samaritans were a people group who were hated just because they existed. They literally had done nothing to deserve the kind of hatred that Jews spewed on them. Because during the diaspora, Jews had intermarried with Gentiles. That's a big no-no. So their ancestors had sinned. And because their ancestors had sinned and produced Samaritans, this whole people group, Jews hated them with such a passion. There's a place in John 8:48. It says the Jews said, that clinches it. They're mad at Jesus and they say, "We were right all along when we called you a Samaritan and said you were crazy and demon-possessed." That's how much they hated him. It was a slur word. As a way to insult people when you called him a Samaritan. They hated them so much. And Jesus said, not only am I going to say the Samaritan is your neighbor, because that's what the guy was asking. He said, I'm going to show you how the Samaritan is the superhero. The hero in this whole story is the marginalized, hated person. Unbelievable. Unbelievable the way Jesus does it. And you notice what he says at the end. He doesn't answer the question the guy gives him. He says, which one was a neighbor? Which one acted in such a way? This is kingdom stuff. Just because we have a great covenant relationship with God doesn't mean he doesn't care what we do about it. He actually really cares how we show people love and how we become and act out being a neighbor. It's like, don't just come and tell me you love people. What does that mean? This guy was a neighbor to someone who hated him, to someone who probably despised him and afterwards was probably going, ugh, oh, a Samaritan did all that for me? Doesn't matter. That's the person who shows love. I love this guy could not even say at the end of the story when Jesus said, now who was the neighbor? He could not even say the word Samaritan. You notice that? He didn't even answer the question like that. He says, the one who showed him. I imagine he's probably got clenched teeth, spitting the words out like, sure, fine. You're going to tell me that a person like that can actually be the hero of the story? Yeah. That's how Jesus was. Because when we push people to the outskirts of society and they don't feel like they belong anywhere, it doesn't mean that they actually don't. It just means we think that. And there are people in our culture everywhere who are pushed out. Who are pushed out of family, who are pushed out of society, who are on the outskirts looking in, who maybe have had to develop a very tough veneer to get through life. And yet the best thing that we could ever do is to say, come to my house, eat my food, play with my kids. I trust you. I'm extending invitation to you because that's what Jesus did. Now, if we struggle with this, and I'm encouraging you, of course, to start thinking through who these people are today, right here. Just keep in mind, we're in good company because the early church struggled with this too. And we can see evidence again and again of how their prejudices got in the way of what God wanted to do. Now, they caught on to it pretty quickly, but God had to get their attention fast. In Acts 8, Jesus had said, get out of Jerusalem. I mean, even this, it's a beautiful picture of family on mission back there, but that was only in Jerusalem with Jews. You know what I'm saying? There was more to what this families on mission was supposed to look like, and they didn't want to do it. A lot of people say it was because they were scared. There's no reason to be scared. They were comfortable, and they might have had some prejudice. I'm not sure. They didn't want to reach Gentiles until Stephen was killed, and in Acts 7, and then it says they had to flee because great persecution fell upon them. Later on in Acts 8, we see Philip with the Ethiopian eunuch. Eunuchs were the type of person who was very, very ostracized, pretty much by everybody. And it says the Holy Spirit told him to go stand out on the road at a certain time and wait, and whoever came by was going to be the person he was supposed to talk to. Is it possible that maybe he wouldn't have done that if the Holy Spirit hadn't spoken so clearly? I don't know, but it's possible. We all have things in our heads, right? In Acts 10, Peter did not want to go to Cornelius' house. He was a Gentile, and he is certainly not about to eat his food. And the Holy Spirit had to speak to him very, very strongly through visions and say, hey, this guy's going to show up at this. I mean, make it as supernaturally clear as possible just to get Peter to go to this guy. Again, we think of it like, oh, this is a big thing happening in the early church. Put it in today. That is straight up discrimination, prejudice that he had to work through. Now, to his credit, he listened, right? And then I love in Acts 16, the story of Paul. He gets this vision of a man from Macedonia calling him to help. But you know who the man from Macedonia actually was? Lydia, a girl. Okay? And I just kind of wonder, when he shows up in Macedonia, guess who he finds? A bunch of women sitting by the river serving God. And they come to know Christ. And then it says, the men that he was traveling with, Luke was one of them. This is why we know the story in the book of Acts. It says, she comes and says, hey, come stay in my home. And it says, and Luke says, after many, many times of urging us, we finally did. She had to urge them over and why? I don't know. Maybe it's because he was looking for a man from Macedonia. And maybe God had to show him a man because he wouldn't have come for Lydia. I don't know. It's possible, right? I mean, the Holy Spirit gets this moving, and he was even doing all this stuff through the early church, even through their prejudices, even through the times that they couldn't see what was right in front of them, that he wanted to show them. He still moved through them in that kind of supernatural, powerful way. He is still going to move through us, but are we missing people? Are we missing people? Because we don't know how to look for them, and it might just seem a little too crazy. It might just seem a little too weird or smelly or strange, if they actually became a part of the family. It's really nice and tidy when everybody's like us. I like it. It's easy. On the same socioeconomic level, sweet. We have things to talk about. If their kids are pretty much grown up the way my kids have grown up with, easy. Got it. But that's not what Jesus did. He went way outside of what was natural to him. Now, what are some stigmas that are still around today? Unfortunately, racism is alive and well. I reached out to a friend because of the killing of Jordan Edwards that happened a week and a half ago, and just said, what can I do? It was this woman is absolutely amazing. She's a micro church leader. I don't even know how many churches are under her in the Tampa area. Most of the leaders that she's raised up are women, and almost all of them are women of color, which is unheard of in the American church in general. She's unbelievable. And she said, well, I have two sons. She's first of all from Belize, so she's an immigrant, and second of all, black. Okay, so she's like, there's a lot going on in our world. She said, I have two sons, and my 10-year-old is wearing size 14 clothes because he's so tall. And she said, Jordan Edwards was 15. My son looks 14, so it's intense. It's hard around here. And she said, people who don't know me super well will reach out in times like that, like me. We're just becoming friends. But she said, the people who really walk alongside me don't really say anything in those instances because we talk about it all the time. And she said, they're grieving with me like family to the degree that they don't have to say anything. We don't have to say anything. There's the absolute terror that I live under. I mean, not really, Christ has set us free, blah, 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 but the feeling that it's still out there and that I have sons who are growing up in this world even though it's great in a lot of ways, it's still pretty scary, is a big deal. That's real. That's real stuff. That's real stuff today. I got that message today. So, unfortunately, this stuff is still around. The idea that someone is a certain way because of their color. I grew up in rural Alabama. I learned in youth group. You know what I learned in youth group? That passage about what fellowship does light have with darkness means that people should not date darker people than them. Literally, a guy who was paid to be a youth pastor told this entire group, and I just remember my sisters and I were like, so we got to find a half Indian, half white dude? Where are we going to find that? Especially in this town. Not that I would have ever married anybody from that town. We're like, what? We've dated half of you. Like, what in the world? It's so confusing. We're like, you're telling us this is what God says? No, Moses was married to a black woman. You know what I'm saying? He was just so confused for so long. Like, how can, and I tell those stories and I laugh about them because I'm like, seriously? And people are like, are you kidding me? Like, in your lifetime, people still believe those things. There are still reasons that people will look down upon. The word stigma means to brand somebody like a slave. What it does is it brands people as less than. Sexism, unfortunately, you guys, I'm the pastor of this church, so maybe it doesn't stand out to you quite as much, but believe me, I walk outside of Summit County for half a second or even just go on social media, it's there. It is alive and well. Class differences, thinking that if people just worked harder, they could have the same level of success that I do. Right? If people are in a place of poverty, they've clearly gotten themselves there because they didn't work hard enough or they didn't make the right choices. Even the idea of, right now with the health bill, I've seen some things about pre-existing conditions. That has nothing to do with the health bill. It's like the dumb things that people say. And I saw this guy post and said, well, if people made better choices, and I was like, well, my mother died 6 weeks after they found stage 4 lung cancer, and she had never smoked, was healthier than any other woman her age that I knew of. I don't think it's always a pre-existing condition because people are stupid. Sometimes things just happen to people. And even if it is because of a person's choices, Jesus would still reach out. What in the world are we doing? What are we doing? What are we saying to people? You're valuable and you're not, and here's why. I've got it all figured out. I speak for God. This is why you're less than me. Gay people. That's a massive stigma in our world. And it makes it trickier because of what the Bible says. And yet, people want to be loved and people want to be part of a family. And we need to get over some stuff. I know what the Bible says. I believe what the Bible says. But seriously, when people can't come around Christians because they just already know it's going to be like, cooties, stay away from me because of something about them. That is not what Jesus would do. And I would say in our culture today, immigrants and refugees. This is a current issue, especially people who don't speak English. And I don't even want to tell you some of the things I hear people say when they don't think I speak English. Unbelievable. The kind of thing where people just make offhand comments because they assume things about people. Jesus would never do that. Even when people have made life choices that have gotten them where they are. Do you ever see evidence of Jesus lecturing somebody about the choices they've made? He does say, stop it, because this is killing you. This is hurting you. You almost got stoned today because you were caught in the act of something that is sin. Stop doing it. But meanwhile, come into this family. Come into this family. We'll give you some other resources. We'll give you some other options. You don't have to live like this. I know this is intense, okay? This is why we have prayer time afterwards, so don't hate me. Dr. Martin Luther King said in his book, Strength to Love, he says, this is, of course, his issue that he was dealing with primarily was racism. He says, the Negro must convince the white man that he seeks justice for both himself and the white man. Hatred paralyzes life. Love releases it. Hatred confuses life. Love harmonizes it. Hatred darkens life. Love illumines it. He's saying, for all of us, if we can get rid of some of these things and love each other through it, all of us have a better life. Everybody does. Just remember the spoken word from before. She says, to ask of a drink is no big deal, but to ask it of me, a woman unclean, ashamed, used and abused, outcast, a failure, a disappointment, a sinner. No drink passing from these hands to your lips could ever be refreshing, only condemning. And as I'm sure you condemn me now, but you don't. Thank God he didn't condemn us either. Sometimes we look at our lives and we think, well, I'm pretty good. I pretty much got it together. Now, those people don't as much, so sometimes I got it together more than we do. Regardless, when people don't have people, they want to find people who love. And all the other stuff gets worked out as it goes. Because God's real, and he's awesome, and he loves people, and he can do all that. As we are trying to be a family on mission, who are we trying to be a family on mission to? And it is really a very helpful thing to every once in a while turn around and look at the people that we're surrounded by and say, do they all look like me? Do they all speak like me? Do they all have the same level of socioeconomic wealth? Even if I feel poor, are they all poor like me? I mean, come on. There are all sorts of people that God wants us to interact with. We can't just pick and choose who we want in our lives. He brings people of peace that we're ready for and people of peace that we're not. To known is to be loved, and to loved is to be known. And that's what we're supposed to do. Know people, love people. Let God do some other stuff. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up. Sorry, I have this really annoying cough. Tonight is the first Sunday night of the month, and because of our space, because the coffee's back there, and we usually hang out in this room and socialize after services are over about this time every week, we don't normally get to have extended times of worship and prayer, and so we set aside the first Sunday night of the month to be able to do that. And sometimes we play a playlist from the back, and sometimes the worship team wants to do their thing. And so what we're going to do now is transition into that time of prayer. You can stay, you can go. There might be someone out in the hall to greet you if you're new. But the idea is we're giving God space to speak to us, and we're giving God space to speak to us together. Because I know you can just go home, you can pray about this stuff, but there's something about we're trying to lean into the corporate sense of who we are. We're not just each of us. We're Elements Church together, you know? So as we pray together, as we listen to God together, let's be listening with these things in mind. On the back of your bulletin, where I put the sermon notes, and there's some over on this table and some back there, I really want to encourage you to pull it out. I put some questions on there that are like getting you to think about these things that you can lean into as you're listening to God in prayer. Okay? And here's some of the questions. Who are the groups of people who are stigmatized around us? Who are the people who maybe don't find it so easy to come? And I don't just mean into our church circle, I mean just into our lives in general. Who would find it very hard to kind of break in? Who would maybe come close and watch and say, wow, that's such a cool community. You know what, it's easier just for me to stay where I am because I don't really belong. Who are the people who are unclean in our culture? Who are pushed aside? What fears do I have that would keep me from engaging with anybody that Jesus would love? I'm not telling you that your job is to engage with everybody. I'm telling you there are fears that keep us from it, and there may be someone at some point that God says, this is someone who's supposed to be in your life, in your family, in your home, and those fears can't keep us from that. What imaginary lines in the sand have been created by stigmas that God is inviting us to cross? Even in our own lives. There's nobody in this room, and I guarantee there's nobody who's going to listen to this, who is intentionally pushing people away, who's intentionally trying to exclude people. I know that. The question is not what we're intentionally doing. The question is, are we maybe doing something unintentional that's a hard barrier for people to cross? Are we maybe just not looking in every place, just the places that are normal and natural? Is there anyone God is asking me to invite into the family that would require me to reach way outside? Is there anyone he's asking me to disciple? That it's like when I look at that, like that kind of be a pain because I have to reach across a language barrier or I have to reach across some other barrier. But God is saying, do it, we do it. Lord, we love you and we give you everything. And I know this is intense. This is a super intense message, and really predictable patterns would have been more fun. But really when we look at it, Lord, there are things that keep us from being the body. And if you can show us those things tonight, I know the heart of people here. We want to reach outside and we want to see them for what they are. We want to go beyond, because this cannot be the family of God unless it looks like a lot of different people coming together. We want to be that family, the one with the hands that all look different and yet somehow are unified as the body of Christ. I just want to ask tonight, if everybody could just bow your head, close your eyes, just before we go into prayer. I just want to give an opportunity. If there's anyone here tonight, you don't know that you have made that decision, or maybe it was a long time ago and it feels like you've been outside the family. I just want to ask, if you want to kind of embark on this journey, it's not just receiving Christ, it's also receiving us. It's also receiving God's family. There's no way to do one without the other, according to the Bible. but we want to support you and be there for you and learn from you too. That's the way a family works. And if there's anyone here tonight, you say, I want to start that journey tonight, I'm just going to ask you to lift up your face and make eye contact with me. Nobody else is looking across the room except me. Okay. Then we're going to just lean into prayer and grab coffee. Head out whenever you want. There's no pressure. London, you can go ahead and just lower the lights. If you want to ask anybody for prayer, we'll be around, several of us. Ask anyone for prayer that you want. Sit as long as you want. Go around the outer edges of the room if you want. Stay in your seat if you want. Stand and worship if you want. You can do whatever you want in this space. That's what we have it for. So we love you, Lord. We're just offering it to you. We offer to you everything that we have tonight. We just ask that you'll take it and use it for your glory.